With Julian Lopetegui's future uncertain at West Ham due to a poor first half of the season, I do think a managerial change is definitely on the cards. Now, although I do think this appointment is very unlikely to happen, he is the bookies' favourite currently. As you can probably tell by the title of the video, today I'll be doing a deep dive into how I think Michael Carrick will set up West Ham if he ever does become the next manager. Before having a look at West Ham's team and how I think they'll be positioned in a Carrick system, we first need to look at Middlesbrough's side and see how Carrick has been setting them up, especially for this season anyway. As you can see, we have now moved over to the tactical board to give you a bit more insight into how Michael Carrick sets up his team. As you can clearly tell here, this is the Middlesbrough team. This isn't nothing to do with West Ham at the moment. I'm not necessarily talking about in depth of Middlesbrough. I'm here to kind of just talk about the shape rather than the actual players themselves. As you can see, the standout things to everyone here, you can see he sets up in a 4-2-3-1. Now, although it is a 4-2-3-1 on paper, this formation doesn't stay the same throughout the game. Just like every other team, they always adapt slightly, whether they're attacking or defending. Now, the standout players in this side that you need to keep an eye on, especially when I move it over to how they play in possession, is number 5, Borges, the left back, number 10, McGree, the left-sided midfielder, and number 4, Luke Ayling, the right back. Now, as I said, they don't stay in a 4-2-3-1 when in possession. A lot of teams kind of now changed it up to either form a 3-2 base or a 2-3. Carrick likes to set up using a 3-2, where one of his fullbacks comes in to form a back 3. As you can see, this is how Middlesbrough actually set up in formation when they have the ball. It's a 3-2-5 essentially. Most teams nowadays play it. The most important thing about this formation is that it allows a numerical advantage in the midfield. As you can see, with McGree, Azaz and Hackney and Barlasser, that is a box midfield. So most of the time when you come up against opponents, they're going to have a 4-3-3 or defenders a 4-1-4-1. And you're going to outnumber the opposition in midfield, which is obviously very important if you want to win the midfield battle. Now, talking about some of the player profiles, as I said, we did need to keep an eye on number 5, Neto Borges. As I said, this player right here is the left back. He essentially acts as a winger when they have the ball and keeps the width. And then, obviously, the left midfielder, McGree, comes in, drifts in a bit more centrally and acts as like the left 10, essentially, in this formation. This then allows Finn Azaz to push on into like the right half spaces in these sort of areas here. And then we've got Ben Doak keeping the width on the right. The midfield 2 pretty much stays the same as if it was to stay in a 4-2-3-1. The pivot in Barlasser and Hackney, both very comfortable on the ball. Hackney's, I think, the more progressive one in terms of he's the one that's going to get forward slightly more and do a bit more of creative work, whereas Barlasser is just the defensive-minded player. But both need to be very comfortable on the ball, as these are going to be picking a ball off the centre-backs and obviously finding either McGree, Azaz, or even out wide to Borges and Doak. I also said Luke Ayling was very important in this formation. As you can see, number 4 Ayling is their right back. He's not necessarily going as far forward as Borges over here. He's forming a back 3 with Edmondson and Rav van der Berg. So as you can see, the left centre back in this formation is going to cover the left channels here. So ideally, you want him to be comfortable on the ball in passing, getting the ball down to Borges or looking to have the ball into Barlasser. And obviously, Rav van der Berg is going to be the commander. He's the central centre back. So in my opinion, I think West Ham, have got the players, or most of the players, to kind of play this sort of style. I think one of the main issues with a Lopetegui system was the fact that how wide open we were at the back. Oftentimes just leaving the 2 centre-backs and then both full-backs bombing on. This is just an absolute disaster. And the amount of times I can go through clips of us getting torn apart through the flanks and through centrally even, just on a counter every single game. It was just ridiculous. But forming a 3-2 base like Carrick does allows for a bit more defensive stability. When Michael Carrick's side do not have the ball, they like to play a 4-4-2, sometimes a 4-5-1. They like to sit in a mid-block, but they do press. They aren't just sitting back in a mid to low block. Essentially what we used to do under David Moyes and his counter. Their forward players are essential in pressing. They look to win the ball back quickly and often play really good counters. Although they are direct at times, they do also keep the ball on the floor. It's not just punting it long all the time. They do like to play football. They're a good possessive-based side, as you can see by the stats here. But in the modern era, I do think this is an effective way of playing nowadays. You can't just be asking players to press relentlessly, otherwise you are going to get found out. If you look at Ange onto Tottenham, they press so high and get caught out constantly. So sitting in the mid-block, soaking up a bit of pressure and looking to counter quickly and directly would probably suit our team, if we're being honest. Now that we've covered Middlesbrough and how Carrick likes to set up them, we kind of now need to move on to West Ham and how I think he'll set up us. I'd be personally very excited if this was to happen, as I feel like we were very good under Moyes in terms of counter-attacking and being very direct. I'm not saying we have to do that constantly, and that is the only way we can play. I do think he was a bit one-dimensional at times, and that is kind of what fouled us near the end. However, I think a combination of directness plus calmness in possession is essentially what we need. As you can see, we are now back on the tactical board and we are looking at a West Ham side rather than a Middlesbrough side. And as I said, I've kept it the same. Instead of keeping it into a 4-2-3-1, I've just shown you what it is like when we have the ball. So it's still the same 3-2-5, and these are the players that I've put in the positions. Now, the first thing that stands out to me, in my opinion, is the box midfield. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be drawn to the fact of the pivot in terms of Souček and Alvarez, but realistically, there's not a lot we can do with that at the moment. In my opinion, it was very bad recruitment in the summer. We failed to address our midfield situation and we didn't bring in anyone. The only person we brought in was Carlos Soler in terms of that midfield and Guido Rodriguez, and both of them I don't think have a lot to offer in terms of the long-term future at West Ham. So I've gone with Souček and Alvarez. For me, Souček is definitely undroppable. He's probably been one of our better players this season, and he could be the more advanced midfielder out of the two of them. He's the one that can maybe create late box crashes and obviously do what he does best in the box, because let's be honest, Souček is an amazing player whether it is the opposition's box or our own box. The player I've got next to him is Edson Alvarez. Now, I do have my reservations about Alvarez. I don't think he's the sort of player that we need. I've said this from the start, not this season, but he's kind of the only player we've got at the moment. The only other option would be Guido Rodriguez, and I think we'd all prefer Edson Alvarez. He's going to be the sort of player that's going to be the more defensive-minded. He's going to have to come and get the ball off the centre-backs. But although Alvarez and Souček aren't both very progressive players in terms of either carries or passes, if you look at our back three, the back three are very good at progressing the ball, either carrying it or passing it. I've got Aaron Wan-Bissaka as the right centre-back. I do think playing that a bit more conservative would suit him better in terms of it would allow him to go against a 1v1 against the opposition's winger. And it would, instead of bombing on forward and having so much space behind him that he needs to recover from constantly, it's going to allow him a little bit more time and in order to assess the situation when he's up against a winger rather than just like being absolutely nowhere. I think if you put Todibo as a central centre-back, you're going to see the best out of him. He's quite clearly the best on the ball that we've got in terms of our centre-backs, and I think it would allow him even to carry the ball out of the defence sometimes, and allow him to come into the midfield. I'm not saying all the time, but a bit like how Ruben Amorim wants to set up his central centre-back at Man United. Having Max Kilman on the left-sided channel at the centre-back, I think really would excel his game. Obviously under Lopetegui, you've seen us do a lot of passes from obviously the centre-backs over to the winger to try to create obviously 1v1 situations there with the wingers. Especially if you put Kilman slightly wider in possession, I think you'd see his passing capability a lot more, and I think he'd actually benefit from having that little bit more space and freedom, just creating a little bit of a better angle for him to pass into, either that's finding one of the centre midfielders or even finding Bowen, obviously on a quick counter. Now the main thing that I do like about this formation is the position that Paqueta takes up. I personally, I know a lot of disagree, but for me, Paqueta's best time at West Ham was when he was on the left with Emerson behind him and Paqueta constantly come inside, drifted centrally and become essentially one of the 10s. He was always a spare man in this position, which allowed him so much time on the ball, because if either the fullback would either track him into the midfield and that would allow Emerson to have space, or the fullback of the opposition team would just stick with Emerson and that would allow obviously Paqueta to have a bit more time on the ball. And of course Paqueta works well with one of his better friends in Emerson, so putting these two back on the same side might get the best out of both of them. This also allows a midfield, essentially, of Paqueta and Kudus, which a lot of people have been calling out for since the start of the season. It allows them to get into the same midfield without actually reducing our defensive capabilities, because they are both 10s, and they're both, obviously, Kudus is going to be looking at this sort of area here, Paqueta this sort of area here, and they'll be able to work well with each other. Obviously, Paqueta, I believe, is probably a bit better in terms of picking up the ball here and then going, whereas Kudus is more of a carrier. Or Paqueta obviously better at passing. I think he leads our chances created in the league this season. So although he's having a poor season, he's definitely vital in creating chances for West Ham. Now on to Kudus. As I said, Kudus, we've got him in the 10. I think he wants to play that position. Obviously, we've been putting him out on the left. He doesn't look happy out there. I think either the right or the 10 is the best position for him. Now this would allow Kudus to drop and pick up the ball and obviously carry. He's such a good ball carrier. He obviously in the similar ilk to someone like Morgan Rogers at Aston Villa, who we've seen done so well this year. He'll be able to work well with Bowen as well. And as I said, one of my main concerns with this formation is that Bowen will be keeping the width. And obviously, we all know from watching Bowen, obviously Bowen's best position is obviously cutting in onto his left foot. So without an overlapping kind of run from Aaron Wan-Bissaka, he still can do it, but it'll be a bit more conservative. It kind of might hinder him into being pushed more out wide, and defenders might be able to defend him a lot easier. This is why I think if Kudus is on the same side as him, he'll be able to work well with each other, obviously, because at times we can see Kudus come out wide, overlap him, and create a bit more space, a 2v1, obviously the fullback, and this then allows Bowen to come in and kind of work well with the striker, especially if you've got Fulcrum, like a big man, who'll be able to make knockdowns for him so that he can obviously feed off the scraps, a bit like what we saw against Southampton. Now onto the striker. I put Fulcrum. To be honest with you, I don't know who our striker will be come end of January. There's talks of Fulcrum going. There's talks of every one of our strikers going. To be honest, we don't currently really have a striker. So hopefully they do address that situation in January. If not, we could even see Bowen go up front. We could. And with Bowen up front, although you're lacking the physicality side of things in terms of hold-up play, it will allow Somerville even to come out on this side here. It would allow Somerville to come out on the right-hand side. And although Somerville is obviously right-footed, he isn't going to want to cut in onto his left. This would be even better, to be honest with you, because he'd be able to hold the width, and instead of wanting to cut in constantly, he'd be able to go round. I personally think Michael Carrick would be probably the best managerial signing we could make of people who's not necessarily available, but the people who are out there at the moment. I know people are obviously going to go, we could have got Ruben Amorim, we could have got this, we could have got that, but if we're being realistic, I personally prefer a British manager or a manager that has experience within English football. And I think Michael Carrick, obviously, he's played for us before, he knows what the club's about. I couldn't think of anyone better, personally, who I'd want managing West Ham. I think it would rejoice the fan base, everyone will get behind him, and as we can obviously tell by his time at Middlesbrough, he isn't a bad manager. He's definitely one to keep an eye on. And I'm not saying he's going to come in and hit the ground running necessarily straight away in terms of we're going to get Europe, we're going to get this, we're going to get that. But it's a project. He's a young manager we can all get behind, and it's a project that we can look forward to. Obviously, you guys know that I would like Michael Carrick here by this video. But what do you guys think? Who would you like as next manager? I know obviously Lopetegui isn't gone yet, but by the reports of how we're linked with every other manager under the sun, he probably doesn't have a lot of time left in his job. So I think it's good that we're looking around at different options.